So I had an experience this morning. If you're doing the workbook lessons according to the calendar, today is the 113th day of the year, so it's workbook lesson 113. And I did that today and had an experience of peace, which was enduring, meaning longer duration, and profound for me. And so what I've done is taken that lesson and changed the words a little bit and came up with this. It's the idea of, in order to enter into peace, you cannot drag your old self-concept with you. You have to leave that where it was and have your true self enter into peace. And so the words that I found in this lesson were, I am one self, completely whole, at one with all creation and with God. From my one self, whose knowledge still remains within my mind, I see God's perfect plan perfectly fulfilled. And that induced a state of awareness for me today that was truly, I now know what it feels like to rest in God. Whereas before I could talk about it, now I've experienced it. And I've experienced this before for perhaps 5 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that, and then as the Course said, time and space close in on you and you're back into an awareness of your time-space defined self, little self. But today I entered into a place of rest that is the goal of this course. The reason I share this is not to talk about myself, but to encourage all of you who have been there for brief periods of time, that if you practice these lessons consistently, you are inviting this experience. You are it's the invitation of the Holy Spirit that you would enter into a state that does not seem like your normal, when I say normal self, is certainly not your little self. It's your true self. And that's really the most rewarding experience you could have, I could have. So we're not reading as sequentially today, but what we are doing is going over some of the major points in chapter 5, which was entitled Healing and Wholeness. And it includes many ideas that are adjacent to healing and wholeness. We'll cover some of them here. And so the first section is I think one of the most lovely titles. It's the invitation to the Holy Spirit. It's the inviting the mind, the consciousness of Holy Spirit into your awareness so that you could be host to the Holy Spirit. Just like you're hosting someone at your house, you're hosting the Holy Spirit. And so the sequence in which the information comes out today is somewhat like the organization, my mind. It goes in a lot of directions at once. So I'm just acknowledging that. I'm not going to pretend like this is all perfect sequence here. In contrast to the invitation of the Holy Spirit and being at rest, we need to recognize when our mind is not in that state. And so the ego fosters a different state of mind referred to as the split mind concept. It's an idea of your mind torn in two directions, divided, and attempting to hold both responses at the same time. So let me elaborate on that. The holy part of your mind is forever present and alert. Peace is always within you, always. And then the ego part of your mind comes along and attempts to a different agenda entirely. So we, excuse me a minute, I need to let somebody in here. So the ego has an entirely different agenda. And the Course tells us it's necessary that we learn to distinguish that ego prompting, those ego impulses, from our higher self, our holy self. It begins with learning to recognize the difference between those two perspectives. So with that, I'm going to go over some ideas that were in section 1, the invitation of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to thank Julie for being our part-time reader today.
God blessed his children with a way of thinking that could raise their perception so high they could reach almost back to him. The Holy Spirit represents a state of mind close enough to one-mindedness that transferred to it is at last possible. Thoughts increase by being given away. The more who believe in them, the stronger they become. To the mind, everything is an idea. Your higher mind thinks according to the laws Spirit obeys, honors the laws of God, and invites the Holy Spirit. The voice of the Holy Spirit is the restoration of the integrity of the mind. Holy Spirit points the way beyond the healing that it brings and leads the mind beyond its integration toward the paths of creation. It is at this point that sufficient quantitative change occurs to produce a real qualitative shift. Healed minds perceive their oneness and become glad. A healed mind will naturally respond as one. Healed minds have integrity, are integrated, and made one.
Mm-hmm. So it very much, these are foundational ideas within A Course in Miracles. It very much is necessary that you recognize the three states of mind: the sick mind or ego state of mind, false perception, fear, judgment, guilt. The second state is the goal of this course, is to heal all that the ego has introduced. The healed mind, true perception, it's the role that the Holy Spirit has to call you out of your ego state and into the state of healing. That state, however, the healed state, is the solution to the problem of the ego. It is not the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is to return to your original state, your true spiritual state of one-mindedness. And the Holy Spirit, by bringing you into the healed mind state, prepares you for that ultimate state of one-mindedness. So it says that the Holy Spirit represents a state of mind that is close enough to one-mindedness. It's not the same as one-mindedness, but it's close enough so that at last you can transfer from the healed state into the one-minded state. And this can be thought of as the restoration of the integrity of the mind. Let me explain that just a bit. At the beginning of creation, all minds were as one. There was no split, there was no separation, there was no guilt or interference. The mind had complete integrity in that every aspect of it was in harmony with every other aspect of it. The notion of the separation is going a different direction that splits the mind. It loses its integrity. So the ego state lacks integrity. And the voice of the Holy Spirit calls us back to be reintegrated with the one mind. It points the way not only to healing the intermediate state, but it points the way beyond healing and leads the mind beyond that to its integration to the final state where it re-enters into union with all creation. One more point. There's quantitative changes and qualitative changes. Quantitative changes are the types of experience you will have when you work with this program for years. You work through the workbook lessons, for example, 365 lessons. There's a lot of quantity there. And then you do them again and again, that's 1,000 lessons. And that's only 3 years. So quantitative changes are those things that happen in and out every day where you're able to let go of guilt and judgments and resentments one by one and move forward, so to speak, a step at a time. And that will take you a long way. It's a journey of 1,000 steps. Metaphorically, I'm speaking here, a journey of 1,000 steps. Don't quote me on the numbers. And then eventually you're ready for a real qualitative shift. This is not just another baby step. This is a gigantic shift from healed mind into one-mindedness. It is a shift you will never forget throughout eternity. It is a shift completely away from any, it occurs when forgiveness is complete, when your learning has come to an end, when God sees that you're ready, he brings you back into a state of divine union. It's a qualitative shift. And the Holy Spirit sees this entire plan from the beginning, and even where you are today, she is leading you along in the direction, little baby steps at a time, that will ultimately bring you to this final, it's called the final step, the qualitative shift. It's where you become integrated and made one once again. Heather, you had your hand up? Don't know if I've, okay. You should be able to unmute yourself now. I had something off before.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, hi.
Okay. I love the part about the quantitative change and the qualitative change. The quantitative change, we've talked in the past about it being like the horizontal, you know, we move along, you know, at a certain pace. And then the qualitative shift is up vertical, where we immediately go right into that presence. And, you know, it's like what you were describing about knowing the difference today between staying in that state and then getting yourself there. So I just love that you shared that. And that's what it reminded me of. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not to devalue the quantitative changes, the small, I'll call them small, the kind of frictions that are pretty common in our world with egos. It's a misunderstanding about people. You maybe stop talking for a while, talking about smaller things. And then there's some healing, there's forgiveness and healing. That would be like a quantitative change. And those matter. And after a large enough number of them, God will see that you're ready for a qualitative change. And that final qualitative change, by the way, is beyond the scope of this course. This course is just to take you up to the point where you're ready for the qualitative change. But the last step, the final step, cannot be learned, and you cannot do it. It's taken by God. He accepts you back in to your true state of oneness, because your mind at that point has integrity. It's undivided. It's ready to be at one. So the invitation to the Holy Spirit is the path to get you there. We said this was a summary, so we're going to move on to some of the ideas that were in section 2, the voice for God. And feel free to raise your hand, make comments at any time. If you would like to, questions are always welcome. So as I said, I'm really fond of this metaphor of using the invitation. The Holy Spirit invites you to a kind of perception in which many of the elements are like heaven itself. It's not the same as heaven, but it's the light of heaven. It shares elements, and the Holy Spirit is your invitation to that state. I'm going to let Julie read these words.
The healing gifts are laid everywhere they are welcome. They increase in healing power each time someone accepts them as his thoughts and uses them to heal. Expressed through you, the Holy Spirit will accept this gift that you received of him, increase its power, and give it back to you. Receive his words and offer them to him.
Mm-hmm. So this is inspired, again, this is an abridgment of mine. This was inspired by Workbook Lesson 97. So that was not so long ago. And it's the idea that when we enter into this partnership with the Holy Spirit, there's an exchange of ideas. It's a type of perception that shares many elements that are like heaven itself. And you are initially the recipient of those ideas. And then when you embrace them and practice them like a workbook lesson, you then, metaphorically, you give them back to the Holy Spirit. You affirm that those ideas have now become your ideas, that you place your faith in them, and that's like a giving back of the ideas, and you give them back, you affirm them in your own mind, you give them back to the Holy Spirit, and this enables you to be ready to share them with others. So it's a giving and receiving process where you are multiplying the light of heaven. This is the gifts of the Holy Spirit. She is our teacher and our guide in this process. She understands it very well. Julie?
Holy Spirit works within your mind seeking to inspire your understanding of symbols to a new appreciation of their meaning. This helps change your perception. Holy Spirit motivates you to make the decision to heal the separation by letting it go. Holy perception points the way beyond healing and leads the mind beyond its own integration toward the paths of creation. It is at this point that sufficient quantitative change occurs to produce a real qualitative shift.
Well, we obviously had a repeat of the statement from the previous slide there. So let's focus on what is different here. So when we say symbols, let's think of it in terms of words for a moment. They're both words and images. Like if I say your mother, your mind then brings a representation into your mind as you think about your mother. Your mind then recalls your perceptions of your mother. It's not necessarily using words. It might be feelings and thoughts and attitudes. And this is the way the mind works with anything. It has a way of representing things. So if I say apple, this is less loaded than your mother, perhaps. Apple, some concept of what an apple is comes to your mind. Well, the Holy Spirit is a master at working with these symbols. She understands how to take the symbols that you now believe in and transform them into a new meaning that is consistent with the light of heaven. And therefore, this is perhaps one of the most important things I could teach any student. Every word in A Course in Miracles, every word has, you think you already understand what a love means, what healing means, what the world means, what you mean. Every idea that you encounter in the Course in Miracles, the ego has already scoped out a meaning and a definition and wants you to stay loyal to that definition that the ego has provided. So that's the trap. The Holy Spirit's goal is that you be willing to surrender your attachment to those meanings and those ideas, to let them be undone, and allow your mind to enter into what we can call the neutral zone, where you're not, where you don't cling on to all the baggage of your past beliefs, but you empty your mind of past understanding and definitions of love and life and the world and guilt and peace. You let all that go for the purpose of welcoming the Holy Spirit's new definition of those symbols. She is seeking to inspire you with an understanding of symbols that will give you a new appreciation, not an old appreciation, but a new appreciation of their meaning. And so it's the same, we're going to use the same words in two different ways. And the words that we're going to use are very familiar to you, and they will be things like your life, the world, your love, and yourself. All of those words, the ego will seek to assert its meaning in your mind And this course is going to ask you to let it go. So it might be replaced with the meanings of the Holy Spirit. How humbling is that? To tell you that you don't understand what love means according to the Holy Spirit's definition. How about you don't understand who you are according to the Holy Spirit's understanding? And that the only way you can make room to accept the gifts of the Holy Spirit is that you be willing to let go of what you already thought you had a pretty good handle on. How humbling is that? And this is for those of you that have committed yourself to A Course in Miracles, you're familiar with this. And in fact, you can learn to embrace it and have a good laugh at how I thought I understood what life was about. However, for somebody brand new into the course, this would appear to be a tall order to lay aside all your existing beliefs and allow the Holy Spirit to inspire your mind with a new understanding and a new appreciation of their meaning. This is essential to shift out of the thought system of the ego and into the new perception of the Holy Spirit. Heather?
Yeah, that just happened for me this morning. And it's the word right here on the page, creation, toward the passive creation. So I've had all in my own mind what a creation looks like, what my creations are, what God's creations are. And then this morning I had a kind of blinding, moment when I realized that what I thought it was is not what it is. And so it's just so funny when you say every word that we have a definition, we think, oh, I know what that means. Nope, wrong. It's just so expanded that it just makes me laugh now.
And when you can laugh at it, you're dealing with it really well when you can laugh at it. When you feel belittled or confused or upset that you didn't know any better, that means you're still involved in a struggle of some sort. But when you can laugh, you disarm the ego, because it means you're happy to let go and you welcome letting go of the old idea and inviting the Holy Spirit to teach your mind. Just as an aside, let's remember the ego is a control freak. It wants to control the narrative of your life through self-talk, and that includes defining for you things like, what is the meaning of your life? Who are you? Why are you here? What is your love, your relationship to love? And all these fundamental ideas, the ego wants to control that narrative. And so therefore, you can count on the ego prompting you with past definitions. You can be confident that in any given situation, the ego's ideas will pass across the threshold of your mind. The real question is, if you're going to blindly grab on to that thought, or you're going to say, wait a minute, what does the Holy Spirit have to say about this? Because in that process, that's where you choose again. You choose to make a different choice than the one that the ego would offer. Hi, Kim. You had a comment?
Hey, Jonica. Yeah, I love this conversation right now. And what I wanted to share was that I'm always immediately aware when the ego is involved, because I immediately lose my peace and serenity, and it's just a very quick thing. Now, what I'm not so quick at is getting back to what the Holy Spirit's message is. And I've been thinking a little bit about it lately, and I think a lot of it is just a habit.
Yes.
I think a lot of it is just a habit. It's a habit that I've done longer than I haven't done it. And so it takes me sometimes a few hours. Rarely is it days or weeks anymore, but sometimes it can still be a few hours to correct it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I really want the habit to stop. Just saying.
And it takes practice, and it very much is a habit, Kim, a habit practiced over a lifetime. For instance, just think, my entire life I've used a fork with my left hand. Do you know what it's like for me to pick up a fork with my other hand and try to use that? I can barely find my mouth with it because it has no practice. So it needs to practice on a regular basis and be willing to go through its apprenticeship, the early phases of learning. Richard?
This was just genius so far. I feel like I'm being healed. When you gave the diagram of the visual paradigm
Mhm.
of an apple,
Mhm.
I see a green apple. Someone else may see a red apple. I say, Mom, you say, Mom, I think of Italy, and someone else may think of dinner
Right.
with the family. What is nice, what I'm seeing, and you mentioned the transformation. You let me in. You let me in. Another where the Holy Spirit, when I appeal to the Holy Spirit, that overrides anything that's in my mind.
Yes.
I needed to hear this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if I was in a therapist's office yesterday, I would have been hugging a teddy bear and pounding on the sofa.
Right. Right.
So this is wonderful, man. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad it's helping, brother. Thank you. So moving right along to section 3. So the Course in Miracles uses the metaphor of a bridge a number of times. It says the Holy Spirit is a bridge. She is a bridge from where you find yourself now to the path that she wants to take you on. It is referred to as a path of salvation, a path of forgiveness, a path of peace. But it's kind of, so to speak, it's on the other side. In the new perception that she offers you is where you will find those things, not on the side of the valley where guilt and judgment and fear and resentments and grievances have been found. So it's a guide. She's a guide to your salvation. Julie?
The Holy Spirit is an idea. Recognizing and acknowledge the Holy Spirit in others, and the idea grows stronger in your mind. You cannot understand yourself alone because you have no meaning in separateness. It is a mistake to look for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone. This is the ego's perspective. Holy Spirit sees your rightful place of the sonship is God. When you acknowledge Holy Spirit in your brother, you are acknowledging him in yourself. This will strengthen the voice of the Holy Spirit in you. It must be increased in strength before you can hear it. The way to recognize your brother is by recognizing the Holy Spirit in his mind. Your brother does not have to be aware of the Holy Spirit in himself or in you for a miracle to occur. He may have dissociated the call for God, but this is healed in both of you as you become aware of the call for God in him, and thus acknowledge its being. Holy Spirit must work through opposites because your mind is in opposition.
Mhm. So one of the things about a summary is that you really can only cherry pick a few ideas. There's dozens of ideas in each section, and you can only pick out a few. So this is very much an editorial here of ideas that I choose to bring to your attention. So here's one that has challenged humanity for millennia of time. And it's like, how do you understand yourself? How do you begin to understand yourself? And most people start out in the wrong direction and make a mistake in attempting to understand themselves. And it's right here. It is a mistake to look for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone. And so we know that you will find your true self in the eyes and the light of the Holy Spirit. She already sees you perfectly as you are in God's mind. And you can borrow from her light, her perception, to understand yourself. And people feel this deeply within their soul of trying to find themselves in it somehow in this world. And so they're on this quest, but they haven't been given a guide for how to go about it. And so they try to understand themselves alone and looking within themselves by themselves. And the Course of Miracles is brilliant and says you cannot find the answers there. You must include your brothers. You must look to your relationships with everyone. They are the mirrors of yourself. You cannot understand yourself without them. And so it brings relationships to the center of the healing journey. It is a vital component. You all knew this already. You all knew already that in relationships, how important they are. That's how love gets expressed. You also know how challenging they can be, how that's where the real work is. So, and in the Course, they now give us a guide, a manual for healing those relationships. They are going to be dealt with in more detail later on in chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, when we talk about holy relations, the way the Holy Spirit would have all relationships be. But they're introduced now because the only way you can ever find peace of mind is to make peace with others. You cannot be at war with others and find peace for yourself. Heather?
This line, you cannot understand yourself alone because you have no meaning in separateness. It is a mistake to look for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone. It reminds me of the old myth of Narcissus. That's what happened. He looked in the pool and fell in love with himself. And the rest of his life, he was looking for that. And he never was able to see anybody else because he only saw himself. And so that's partly, the part we have to heal is that we have to get over to seeing just ourselves and as separate. When we see our brother, then we can really heal.
Did you hear that? Narcissus looking in the pool at himself and seeking that image again and again, that is the mistake. It says right here, this is the ego's perspective. To be, and so now our healing journey is by definition brings us into relationship not only with the people we've already met, like our family members, our long-term friends, and our acquaintances. Yes, those relationships do matter, but it will be expanded so that no one is excluded. Matter of fact, that's when you reach the final step, is when no one is excluded in your acceptance of their holiness, when your love and your giving and your forgiving exclude no one. So we need a guide on how to do that. No, I can't imagine how anybody could do this by themselves. In addition, let's see, we're still on the guide for salvation. I think what we'll do, whoops, okay. So Julie, maybe you could read a few of these at a time, and we'll pause and then we'll come back.
Time is a concept of the ego. It wants to delay your progress towards eternity.
Go ahead, keep
Eternity is an idea of God, so the Holy Spirit understands it perfectly. The lower mind, which is the ego's domain, perceives the world by its terms and accepts time without question. The Holy Spirit must perceive time and reinterpret it into timeless. He sees the world as a teaching device for bringing you home. Because of these differences, one level of the mind is not understandable to another, as it is with the ego and the Holy Spirit, with time and eternity. Eternity and peace are as closely related as are time and war.
So I have noticed that when we start talking about time and eternity, a lot of students of miracles, kind of part of them shuts down and it blurs over, and it's kind of like, I really don't know what you're talking about, and I don't think this is something that I, can follow. So there's kind of like a disconnect. And there's a reason for that. Because time is a concept of the ego. It does not want you to be thinking about eternity. It feels threatened by the ideas of eternity. It wants to delay your progress, your understanding, your acceptance of eternity. So notice when it occurs to your mind to tune out to ideas of eternity, that is something you want to offer up to the Holy Spirit. Because eternity is an idea of God of which the Holy Spirit understands perfectly. And so perceiving the Holy Spirit understands eternity, but she knows how to, this goes back to symbols. She knows how to work with your mind as you understand things now. So she recognizes that you feel like you are in a prison in time, that you are a captive of time. She knows this. And her goal is to help reinterpret your understanding of yourself into one of, we'll call it freedom and eternity. from being a captive in time to being free in eternity. And she's a master of these. But those two different viewpoints of time and eternity, of ego and the Holy Spirit, are on vastly different levels of your mind. And therefore, one level of the mind is not understandable to the other. And this is why initially when we talk about eternity, you can't understand it, because you're attempting to bring with you the language and meaning and constraints, the littleness of the Holy Spirit. And that level of your mind cannot understand eternity. It's true. You have no choice. The only way you can begin to truly accept eternal ideas is for you to let go of the ego's constraints and the way it identifies you, enter into that quiet, neutral place where you then embrace the Holy Spirit. And from the Holy Spirit's perspective, eternity makes perfect sense. And this is not intellectual. This requires that you participate with your mind, but this is not an act of great intellectual sophistication. Matter of fact, the biggest prerequisite is your willingness to let go of what you already think you know. That's the entry in here. And so the lower mind cannot understand what the Holy Spirit is teaching, what the higher mind teaches. They are dichotomous. They are opposite ends of the spectrum. And so you will encounter this throughout the course. By the way, we're talking about time and eternity. This applies to all the lessons of the Holy Spirit. The lower mind does not understand what the higher mind is teaching. And so if you find a frustrated miracle student who feels like they can't learn, and it's because their approach is that they're trying to approach it through the ego's terms, through the constraints the ego would impose, which are to really have you give up and not try. So we have to be aware of these things. We have to recognize those barriers to our awareness, because they will cross your consciousness, and be glad when they arise up and you notice it and you let it go. Laugh at it. Be happy that you can just make a choice to choose again and let go of those things. So I found an image on the internet that I thought embodied this. It's of a self moving through a maze of the mind, confused, lost, not able to find its way. And that aligns perfectly with the teaching. You cannot understand yourself alone because you have no meaning in separateness. It's a mistake to look for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone. That's the ego's perspective. You must be willing to shift into the awareness of your soul, where all these things make perfect sense. We've talked about the levels before, but I'm feeling with where we are in our material that we'll certainly bring that up again. So we'll pass over that now. Section 5.4, teaching and healing. You know what? Okay, let's see how this goes. I'm not sure I like everything that's written here, but Julie, you help us out here.
Healing is our function in time. The return the unhealed mind to the higher mind. Devotion to healing is a giving and receiving experience. To have, give all to all. Healing becomes the sharing of true ideas, a means of teaching. Sharing is God's way of creating, and also yours. The atonement brings healing to the mind that thought it was separate. Atonement must be understood as a pure act of sharing, collaborating, joining, uniting with others, two or more joined together in searching for truth. You learn to see others as they are and understand they belong to God as you do. Find meaning in love. All your kindnesses and every loving thought you ever had have been saved. Nothing is left but a blessing.
So this section is called Teaching and Healing. And it is fundamental that the Course teaches, why are you here in this world? Why are you here in this life? Well, the Course says that you are given an assignment, a function, and that function is for you to be a healer. Not only of yourself, and that certainly of yourself, but also to use what you learn in the healing of your own mind to help others heal. And that's where teaching comes in. So healing yourself, helping others to heal, brings us all into the role of teachers of healing. And this is intended to be not a tertiary objective, but in the Holy Spirit's mind, this is your primary reason for being here. And here you might have thought it was to make a living or something else there. Healing is our function in return in time. It talks about a devotion to healing. And in fact, this is the Holy Spirit's agenda. She's totally committed to the healing agenda and wants to enroll you into gladly and willingly accepting that role for yourself so that you become an extension of the Holy Spirit's mission. I don't know. I think it's pretty easy to understand. Intellectually, that's not hard to understand. She's devoted to that. She needs help. She needs you. And she wants to enroll you in the same agenda to extend her mission through you as both teachers and healers. And your life will be blessed as a result of these things. It has its rewards. In fact, every kindness and every loving thought you ever had will be saved and will become part of your soul forever. She guarantees it. Moving right along, section 5. So we've been talking about the Holy Spirit's agenda and her guide to salvation, but we cannot, what is it? There's a term, I'm going off the record here for a moment. There's a term used in Course in Miracles called a bliss ninny. It's not my term. And so this would be a person that always embraces the light and views everything in terms of the light and is unable to acknowledge that which is confused and mistaken in their own life. unable to acknowledge their own guilt and fears because they prefer to remain in a kind of a spiritual bypass of bliss. Well, the Course does not advocate that. The Course advocates that you free yourself from all hidden agendas of the ego. And so learning to recognize the ego's use of guilt is fundamental to this program. So speaking plainly, guilt is the central principle for which the ego will apply pressure on you. In contrast to that goal, the Holy Spirit would help you to bridge over into a guiltless world, a world free of guilt, a world of innocence. Two very different. Can you see how one side of the bridge is the ego's using guilt on your mind? On the other side of the bridge is the guiltless world of the Holy Spirit. Recognize that everyone is deserving of their original innocence. So to use an image here, I really find sometimes art to be evocative of certain ideas and states. And it says in chapter 15 that separation is the source of guilt. And to appeal to it, to separation for your salvation, is to believe you are alone. This is a mistake, a trap. To appeal to separation, to embrace your separateness, is to believe you are alone, and to be alone is to be guilty. It is not your natural state. It alienates you from your true state, because to experience yourself alone is to deny your union with all creation, your oneness with creation. And to believe yourself to be alone is to attack reality. So we're jumping ahead in chapter 15 there, but just to let you know, the role of guilt is going to be repeated. I'll go out on a limb and say it'll come up in every chapter we read. So that's not a big risk on my part. Maybe it's every other chapter. We'll see. But it is, separation is the source for all guilt. It is the state in it remains largely, Linda, this is what's hidden. Many people feel a deep sense of guilt, but they're not consciously recognize that they feel alienated from others. We, in the Course of Miracles, we need to expose that so that we can choose to drop it and let it go and move on, walk towards the light, towards the open door ahead. And it is true that anytime you respond to your ego, you, whether conscious of it or not, you will experience guilt, and you will fear punishment. Okay, if you believe you're guilty, that means you believe you've done something wrong, and you will fear the consequences of your having done something wrong. This is the ego's nightmare, for you to feel separate, guilty, and fear punishment. They all work together, and in your own personal experiences, these thoughts can flash across your mind and all at once and within a second. Separateness, guilt, fear of punishment, and you're all wrapped and you're in darkness. So this is why we focus on this, so that you recognize these things are not natural. This is not who you are. This is not how you were created. These are artificial states. So I have a term I use called existential guilt, and I want to make sure we go over that. Julie?
First, there was existential guilt, an unconscious hidden cornerstone of your beliefs, which seems to be outside your awareness, outside yourself, beyond your control. You feel guilty from listening to the guidance of ego, letting the ego take the place of God, the beginning of the separation. Separation is the source of existential guilt. Ego then believes that you attacked God and are therefore justified in attacking, judging others. This thought disorder is maintained by guilt. Guilt results when you use ego judgment in making decisions. Whatever form it takes, guilt arises from your failure to fulfill the purpose God gave you with your whole heart and mind. Judging by your past and time, how can you be guiltless? You are guiltless in eternity. This results in personal guilt, a feeling of being responsible for an imperfect past, that you have to pay a terrible price for those mistakes. Guilty, not innocent. To limit love to part of the sonship is to bring guilt into your relating by separating out the few and looking to them to meet your imagined needs. You are attempting to use separation to save you. How then could guilt not enter?
Mhm. So this is really vital that you attempt to understand this. Personal guilt, everyone on this call has already become conscious of a sense of guilt associated with your own narrative of your life here in time. It's as you look back into the past, it was not perfect. It was not full of love and bliss and heaven. And we all carry a narrative about that, which implies that we are defective, deficient, inadequate, guilty. That's personal guilt. It applies very specifically to you. And then it extends to the people in your environment that were there when all these events were unfolding. Personal guilt. Most people find it easy to access that. What they find more difficult to access, what is hidden as a cornerstone of your beliefs, is this thing called existential guilt. What do we mean by that? We mean a problem with what you believe about your very being. It's a sense that no matter what your story is on the past, no matter what it is, you are still inadequate, unlovable, unworthy. You can use all kinds of words. It's an ego narrative. It's a belief that you'll never be good enough, no matter what you do. It is the ego's objective to make you question your very being. And so this course, in order to heal, we must recognize this is a mistaken concept and be willing to offer it up as a mistake into the hands of the Holy Spirit and ask for her to correct our understanding and help us to understand ourselves in the light of her heavenly perception. And it's very deep. Psychologically, this is, without the Holy Spirit, this would be largely inaccessible to almost everybody. But with the Holy Spirit's help in this program, you can more and more take that which has been hidden in your beliefs and expose it to the light of truth. And no one would want to hang on to those ideas once you see it in the light of truth. I mean, the choice is clear once it's exposed to the light. Heather?
Yes, I love this line. Whatever form it takes, guilt arises from your failure to fulfill the purpose God gave you with your whole heart and mind. And that has been my struggle probably the last year or so, is this sentence right here, you know, failure to fulfill the purpose with my whole heart and mind. So I was listening to a TED talk, and the doctor was talking to people about their purpose, and he asked, what's the number one question people want to know? And the question was, that everybody said was, I want to know my purpose. No matter what the TED talk was about, it was, you know, could have been anything. The number one question people asked was, what is my purpose? And it just so hit me that it is such an ingrained question. And it goes to until we find what that is, we're going to have guilt. We're going to have existential guilt, because it's wired within us to be part of the brotherhood and to contribute something. And so until we find that purpose, it is different for each person as far as how it's expressed. That is one of the things that can still drive us into guilt, is not knowing what our specific function is. So that was just so comforting to me to know that for me, I have to still seek it with my whole heart and mind. And if I keep doing that, I'm going to find my purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful, Heather. Thank you for sharing that. I want to make sure everybody tracks. If you don't know your purpose, then that means you're wandering along without a sense of God's plan for your life. You're seeking, you might be seeking for it, but it means it's unclear to you. You're walking without illumination. And that will make you feel guilty, because as she's iterated, it's your failure to fulfill the highest purpose God gave you with your whole heart and mind. That makes you feel like you're coming up short. And so this course will again and again bring us back to, what is our purpose? What is our function? And didn't we read just in the previous section in Teaching and Healing that your purpose here in time is to heal yourself and help others heal? And that occurs in the form of teaching healing. Teaching, ultimately, we will learn in chapter 6, will transform this in to have peace, teach peace to others. Richard?
I just have one question. I know intellectually, because I read it and I say it, but it's you really, the way you elaborated on guilt makes more sense. I know for me, guilt is I created the problem, but there's something that's sneaking in, a little crack that's saying, aren't you ashamed?
Yes.
And the shame is I am the problem.
Right.
And and that's the ego.
Yes.
I understand that. How can I stop that? that the parade of thoughts that are attached, the narrative that's attached with shame,
Mhm.
or to shame, excuse me.
Right, right. So Richard, I'm using a metaphor here, but
Mhm.
it's very true. Think of it as different rooms of your mind.
Mhm.
And in this one room where the ego occupies, everything in that room reminds you of your past and guilt and shame. And so, as long as you're in that room, you can't get away from it because it surrounds you in that room.
Mhm.
The only way you can free yourself is to walk out of that room into the other room where it doesn't exist. We'll call it the room, spirit room, the room of innocence, the room of forgiveness. You can only do it by changing the state that your mind is in, and
Mhm.
and that's where you need a guide. It's kind of like we're walking in the dark here. We need the Holy Spirit to guide us out into the other room. And so in many ways, we are like babes having the Holy Spirit guide us. We can't do it by ourselves. We become dependent on her gentle and loving guidance to bring us, our minds, into a different state. So I want you to remember, Richard, there's a room in your mind where none of that shame, well, it's a room of innocence and guiltlessness and forgiveness. That's where you'll find it.
Thank you.
And one more thing, our role, the course is very clear about this. First, you must determine you want to find that room. Because if you're not clear about wanting to find it, it doesn't matter what we teach. You have to make the decision above all else. I want to be free. I want to be forgiven, to forgive, and walk in the light. And once you've made that decision to find it, then this program will help you find it. But you have to be clear in your own mind of the importance of leaving the room of shame and entering into the room of forgiveness.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Noel?
Yes, thank you. The room analogy is very helpful. Thank you. I want to go back to purpose. I find often I have thought that I knew my purpose, and then I get smacked in the face about it. And it reminds me of the lesson, I do not know what anything is for.
Okay.
So coming back to what's in this section, or just before, about our purpose, our only purpose is to heal ourselves and our brothers. That can take many, many forms, I believe.
Yes.
So I still need to ask, what form, what is your best scenario for the form that I should be a healer and a teacher?
So, can I push back a little bit on that? Because I counsel with somebody else that faces the same issue and uses the same words that you said there. And I respectfully have a different view. I think if you are committed to your function being healing, that becomes primary, to heal and help others heal. You go about your life, this is my interpretation now. You go about your life and situations cross your path where there's somebody that needs help. And then that happens to be standing in front of you. And in that moment, it doesn't matter what you've told yourself, what form of healing you are supposed to do. The question is, in that moment, are you ready to let the Holy Spirit guide you? And that's the way I understand this program, is the forms are not the determining factor. It's the willingness to serve as healer, and the situations that you will be brought into are not predictable in advance. But they will cross your path. And the real question would be, if you've already decided, I'm willing to be helpful in that way, then you'll adapt to the form as it's needed. And so if next week a hurricane comes in and all your neighbors are distraught with all the destruction, you adapt to what that situation as it's needed, not because you foresaw it in advance. And so other people, but so that's my view, but I will tell you what I hear other people say is what you said, is that I want to know the form in advance. I want to be clear in my mind what form my role in healing will be, so that I can stick to that agenda, and kind of know in advance. And I think that we can trust the Holy Spirit for those kind of details. And so this is really about a control issue. Do I want to know do I need to know the form in advance? Or can I trust that the situations I brought into, I will be adequate to the task, whatever is required? So this is beyond the scope of what we can handle in detail, but Noel, you've raised a really good issue here. Let's talk about it again. I'll call it, what form of healing am I called to? That question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, we're gonna run out of time. Okay, I'm gonna stick to our time constraint here, and just move through a few things here. With 5 minutes left, there's really so one thing we can skip through is section 5.6, which is time and eternity, because we know what happens to the mind when the notions of eternity come along. The ego wants to shut down and move on to the next subject. And I promise you, this will come up again. So we're going to move on to the next subject, and which is you can tell I like the idea of a bridge to nowhere, or it's not. You can view this as a bridge to nowhere. I guess that would be the ego's characteristic. Matter of fact, Noel, this applies to your question just now. Ego might view this as a bridge to nowhere, or I don't know where this bridge is going, but I need to know in advance. I need to know because it wants to determine the narrative, and it wants to be in control of, think that it's in control of your future. Faith requires, with your own life, a life of healing, that we step forward without knowing, and that we trust instead that Spirit has a plan and is a very capable guide, and that if we step forward in faith, all will be well. And so that's why I like these images that go off into uncertainty, and because it brings us face to face with what it requires to step forward in faith. So let's see. So we're going to skip the section on time and eternity so that but we'll cover it again. And then finally, to wrap us up, section 5.7 says that everything we've talked about today is a decision. There is an old narrative of the ego, a very limiting, familiar narrative to you, that is a decision to keep that narrative and cherish the familiar as I want to be kind here, as damaging as all that has been to our happiness. Ego would still have us cherish and hold tightly to our past and the narrative that we have. The Course helps us to understand that there are decisions to be made here. And I'm going to ask Julie if she'll read this last slide.
Notice when you react with a lack of love to one of God's creations. We must learn that every mind God created is equally worthy of being healed because God created it whole. Your reactions reflect your decisions between guilt or innocence. Reacting with guilt can be undone. The first step in the undoing is to recognize that you have decided wrongly and that you can change your mind. Your part is to return your thinking to the point at which the error was made, and then give it over to the Holy Spirit for undoing. You are merely asked to return to God the mind as He created it. He asks you only for what He gave, knowing that this giving will heal you.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately, after you sift through the reading and these ideas, the Course is very simple. It's really a set of simple ideas. So a situation will arise in your life, maybe later today or tomorrow. A situation will arise and you will react to that situation. And your reactions are going to be either one of guilt and separation and fear, or of innocence and acceptance and love. And when you react with guilt and separation and fear, you want to recognize it. Just happened. Oh, that just happened to my mind, but I don't want to continue along that path. I'm willing for it to be undone. So the first step is to recognize you've decided wrongly and that you can change your mind. And then this is the part we all have to learn, to pay attention to your feelings, because they'll tell you that you've reacted wrongly, you've reacted with guilt. Your part is to return your thinking to the point at which the error was made. To says, what is it that caused me to do that? Oh, it was that something triggered me, and that was my reaction. And Holy Spirit, now I'm taking my reaction that I recognize as wrong, and I'm placing it in your hands, because I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to correct it. I'm giving it to you and trusting you to undo it for me. You're merely asked to return to God your mind as he created it. You're embracing your innocence once again. And so as a way of wrapping up chapter 5, I wanted to suggest that all of you look at the prayer that's at the very end of the chapter. It's about 5-6 lines long. And it is a very touching prayer. I know when we went over it in class yesterday, it was profound for many people on a number of levels. It's something you can use. You can apply it to your own life, especially when you get triggered into a state of mind that your feelings tell you are not happiness and peace. You can use that prayer as a guide to help you find the other room where your mind is innocent and at peace. Heather?
Yeah, I love that poem, and it just came. I don't want to take too much time, but I saw this on TED Talk. I saw this mother who is learning to parent better, and her kid had a tantrum, and he hit the little brother, and so that's the story. And so after he was done, kind of get himself together, she took him in her arms and she said, "Would you like to do that over?" And it was so precious because he went over and he hugged his little brother. And he started to cry. And I just said, oh my God, that's what it is. That's what this poem is. She's given me the do-over. That's the innocence of that child when she just didn't shame him at all. She just said, would you like to do that over? And I just said, oh my God, that's what the Holy Spirit keeps doing for me. She keeps giving me opportunities to do it over and helps me understand that's what this course is about. It's how I get to do that without guilt and without shame. So thank you.
There you have it. What was the book from maybe 20 years ago? Everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. You got to learn to learn to do over again. So we're out of time here. There's always more. Thank you all for your attention to this. I know this is a lot into one session. Chapter 5 is foundational there. If you missed any of the sections, I would encourage you to read them or watch the videos, and we will pick up with the beginning of chapter 6, which will start tomorrow, is the last chapter in the foundational series, where the framework of the Course in Miracles is explained. And after that, we will move into the lessons of the Holy Spirit itself. We begin the journey. Prior to this, it's been helping us to understand where we're going. Now we begin the actual journey. So I hope that you will participate in that in whatever form works for you. So thank you all. Julie, thank you for reading. Merva, it was very nice to have you join us today. Hope that you'll be able to join us again. And
Thank you so much. Can I ask you a quick question?
Surely.
You mentioned that there is a place we can